Hello and welcome to a shorter Granada report because of ITV's coverage of the World Cup. First tonight, the nephew of a man from Oldham killed in a gas explosion in Jersey says his family need answers about how it happened. Earlier today, it was confirmed the death toll had risen to 7. Among them, 72-year-old Peter Bowler from Oldham. His nephew Daniel spoke exclusively to our correspondent, Mel Barham.
He was a great guy, a great character. If he wanted to do something, he would just do it. I'll always admire that, and anything he did properly. So just a great bloke.
Daniel's uncle Pete was due to come for Christmas in just a few days' time. Instead, his family are now processing the news that he was one of the victims of the explosion in Jersey.
Contacted my mother at the time and said, have you seen the news? There's been an explosion, a massive explosion in Jersey. And then it became apparent it was on Uncle Pete's street. And then it became, evident that it was the flat Uncle Pete lived in. And then really, throughout the day, it was a case of hope turning to despair, really.
The devastating explosion at his block of flats in the early hours of Saturday morning was captured on CCTV with a ferocity hard to comprehend. 7 people have now been confirmed dead, with 2 people still missing.
It was just overwhelming sadness. You'll never see him again. And then sort of morphed into that is a feeling I've got now of what's happened.
Peter Bowler had made a life for himself out in Jersey, but the 72-year-old was born and bred in Oldham, where his family still live. Their memories of him are of a man full of life.
He enjoyed karaoke. He was a second Dan of karate, black belt, and he represented Jersey at karate. He was fond of sort of walking and the outdoors, and he'd climbed the Himalayas twice. He enjoyed going out, he enjoyed socialising and just being himself, really well-liked person.
An independent investigation's now been launched into the cause of the explosion, answers that Peter's family ultimately want addressing. Mel Barham, ITV News, Saddleworth.
2 mothers from the northwest have told MPs about the devastating effects an epilepsy drug they were prescribed while pregnant has had on their children. They've been campaigning for decades to get compensation for families affected by sodium valproate, which can cause lifelong disabilities. Well, today they welcomed what could be a step towards financial help. Our political correspondent, Leisha McNally, reports.
Janet and Emma have been fighting for their children all their lives. Now they fight for thousands more, campaigning for babies born with lifelong disabilities because of a drug their mothers were prescribed while pregnant, a drug that is still being prescribed. Today they appeared before a panel of MPs to share their story of taking sodium valproate and the impact it's had on their children.
Me and my husband, we questioned at every appointment, would valproate harm during pregnancy, and we were never warned at all. I've now obviously 5 children affected, and they're all diagnosed with fetal valproate spectrum disorder.
We realised that neither of them were doing the usual milestones. They weren't reaching for toys. Smiling came very late. Walking was very late. Speech.
Today's session followed an independent review of sodium valproate, which set out 9 recommendations for the government. As of last night, 6 had been fully or partly implemented, but the need for an independent agency to oversee a compensation scheme was rejected. It means a family's only option is to sue for clinical negligence.
Families have already been there and it's not worked. They've got nowhere to go. They're coming up against a brick wall constantly, all the time. And that brick wall is being put into place by the government.
These are families who are really struggling with every element of bringing up a disabled child. And it's not the NHS's fault. The government know that.
But their message seems to be getting through. Today, a newly reappointed health minister gave cause for hope.
I'm willing to look at the idea, and that's why I've asked Patient Safety Commissioner only last week to look at this. That may take her a little bit of time to work that up, but she's very sympathetic.
Janet and Emma say this is another step in their decades-long journey, and they plan to keep fighting for families until compensation is agreed. Leisha McNally, ITV News, Westminster.
And we will, of course, bring you any more news on how their campaign is going as and when we get it. Now, commuters across the northwest have been facing further disruption as rail strikes began today. Half of all lines are closed and trains are only operating between 7:30 a.m. and 6:30 this evening after members of the RMT union walked out in a dispute over pay and conditions. Network Rail's urging passengers to plan their journeys. There's a full list of services affected on our website. Now, the funeral's taking place of the former Liverpool and Everton footballer David Johnson. Both Merseyside clubs came together to pay their respects, with Sir Kenny Dalglish and Kevin Ratcliffe among those joining his family for the service. David Chisnell reports.
The great and good of Merseyside football came together today to remember former Liverpool and Everton footballer David Johnson. Forward had two spells with Everton in the 1970s and 80s.
Johnson's shot in!
But it was during his 6 years at Liverpool between 76 and 82 that he enjoyed his greatest success, winning league titles and the European Cup. The Dockers, he was known, also represented his country, scoring 6 goals in 8 appearances for England.
David Johnson, 5-1 to England.
Passed away last month aged 71, and today tributes were paid at Anfield and Goodison as his cortege passed both stadiums on its way to his funeral.
The room was never quiet when Dave was in there because he was always up for a laugh. And he always had a smile on his face. Obviously, he had those 2 spells with Everton, but Liverpool was his first love. And I think it's only in his passing, I think people have really begun to appreciate how much of a contribution he made.
A private funeral service was held for him at St Peter's Church in Bolton. Among those carrying his coffin were Liverpool legends Sammy Lee, Phil Thompson, Howard Gale and John Aldridge. Flowers from family and friends adorned both red and blue hearses, and the LFC crest was draped over his coffin as Merseyside said a final farewell to one of its footballing icons. David Chisnell, ITV News, Liverpool.
Well, next, and the remarkable story of a rescue in which the rescuer never expected to see the rescuee ever again. Stephen O'Gorman was told the man he'd pulled from a river in Tameside had died. So imagine his shock when he found out by a twist of fate that he was very much alive. Zoe Muldoon takes up the story.
And Emily, Stephen, wonderful to see you again, my friend.
A reunion made possible by the most remarkable coincidence. Brian Abram almost died in a cycling accident in Tameside in 2013. 9 years later, he's meeting the man who saved his life. And it's all thanks to 8-year-old Emily O'Gorman from Warrington. Emily's dad, Stephen, helped rescue Brian. But after he was taken to hospital, Stephen was told that Brian had died.
They said that he was no longer with us, which was unbelievably sad. And then I'm thinking, what else could I have done?
Thankfully, Brian survived. He was paralysed from the waist down, but with a little help from his grandson Charlie, he started using a wheelchair and began writing children's books. Brian now tours schools all over the northwest with the adventures of Grandad Wheels. He's spoken to almost 20,000 children, but one in particular had an impact.
I told the children what happened to me, and one little girl called Emily went home and told the story to her dad.
And Stephen, what was going through your head then when Emily told you this story and you thought, hang on a second, I recognise that story?
The coincidence was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe it for weeks and weeks, and we got in touch, didn't we? And I said, it's Stephen from that terrible day, and I'm so glad to see that you're well.
Brian donates all of the money raised from his books to charities Spinal Injuries Association and Backup. So far, he's raised over £51,000.
I wouldn't have been able to do anything if it wasn't him. It's amazing, really.
A special bond between 2 former strangers, now friends for life. Zoe Muldoon, ITV News, Warrington.
A lovely story. Here's Joe.
Mum, wet wipes, toilet or bin?
Bin. Why?
United Utilities sponsors ITV Granada weather.
Thank you. A very good evening to you. Another frosty one to come tonight. Temperatures last night dipped down to around -9, -10. perhaps -8 quite widely again tonight, and staying cold until at least Sunday, when temperatures will return to around normal. Here in the northwest, lots of dry weather to come, thankfully. And overnight tonight, perhaps -6, -7, as I mentioned before, a few freezing fog patches, but generally staying dry as we head into tomorrow morning. It just goes without saying, be careful, it could be icy first thing. As we look at the sun times, it's up at 8:21 and sets at 10 to 4 tomorrow afternoon. A frosty start to the day tomorrow, and temperatures will struggle to recover 2 or 3 degrees. Once any freezing fog lifts, it should be a dry day with some nice sunshine around. But remember, it's cold out there and there will be some ice on roads and footpaths. Take care.
Cleaned up well.
United Utilities sponsors ITV Granada weather.
We're back at the usual time at 6 o'clock tomorrow, but for now, enjoy what's left of the evening. Bye-bye.